to our Secretary of State, the Honorable Mark Hammond.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you for that introduction. And goodness, could you do me a favor? Will you say, "Go Wolves"? Go Wolves! Oh gosh, I'm honored to be back here at Newberry College. I have nothing but fond memories of my time as a student here, and I am so grateful for Newberry College. I look back sometimes and think that if it wasn't for Newberry College, I may not have attended a four-year school. I may have went to junior college. I might have stopped after my AA, but the opportunity that Newberry gave me allowed me to come down here and be something that I really wanted to be at the time. And I think we have several of them in here tonight. A student athlete. And I was really enjoyed playing football, and still to this day, 40 years later, some of my best friends are people who I met here at Newberry College, and we still stay in touch. I wanted to give you a little bit of my background. I said earlier that I finished Newberry in 1986. At that time, I thought I was going to coach and teach. And I went to Clemson, and I had a master's in post-secondary guidance and counseling. I wasn't certified to teach, but I decided to go back to Spartanburg, and my first job was for DYS, Department of Juvenile Justice now, and I was the juvenile probation officer, which I enjoyed. I later was able to get a position in the 7th Circuit Solicitor's Office. I was a criminal investigator, so I was a commissioned law enforcement officer for 5 years, and I helped attorneys prepare cases for trial. I helped them decide if they wanted to true bill a case. We had to bring prisoners up from the jail, and I coordinated the jail tank, and I really enjoyed that position. And that is one of the reasons that I mention those two positions, because I want to mention to you, don't take lightly anything that you do, no matter what job or what training that you have been certified in or qualified for. All that is nothing but helpful for you when you decide to pick a field that you want to choose to work in. Because of my time in family court, because of my time in the 7th Circuit Solicitor's Office, I decided to run for Spartanburg County Clerk of Court. And when I was in the solicitor's office, I just didn't want to know how a warrant was issued and how it ended up being on my desk to investigate it. I wanted to know how it started, how the complaint, how the sheriff investigated, how it was then presented to the magistrate, and how the magistrate court then decided there was probable cause, issued a warrant, and eventually how it went through the clerk of court's office and to the solicitor's office. So that knowledge of the court system at that time, family court, criminal court, I decided to run for Spartanburg County Clerk of Court. And I was clerk of court from 96 until 2002. And I'm going to quickly share this story with you. From 96 to 2002, I participated in 6 elections. I was elected clerk of court in November, then I was reelected in 2000, and then I ran for South Carolina Clerk of Court. I had a primary, I had a runoff, and I had a general election. So 6 elections from 96 to 2002. My kids were young at that time. They had career day at the elementary school, and one of the teachers asked, "What does your dad do for a living?" And my son piped up and says, "He puts out signs." That's all that he knew that I'd done his young life. But I wanted to talk to you about something that's sacred, something that we all should be very proud of, and that's our Constitution. And Constitution Day commemorates the signing of the U.S. Constitution on September 17th, 1787. Constitution Day promotes understanding and appreciation of the foundational legal principles of the U.S. government. Now, You may ask, why did I choose political science when I was here at Newberry College? Well, my father was a state trooper, and he retired from the Highway Patrol with 33 years of service. My mother worked for Spartanburg County. She started in magistrate court and worked her way to personnel, and she was in charge of benefits, retirement, and many other duties. So I had a background in public service. So I always had an interest in government because with my dad being on the Highway Patrol, he knew all the legislators. My mother knew all the members of county council, and we went to functions, and I would meet these individuals, and I always had a lot of admiration for them. And public service was something that I looked at, like I said earlier, maybe going into law enforcement, teaching, a field like that. I come to Newberry, and at that time, Ronald Reagan had been elected president. And you think politics are something now. Ronald Reagan was something back in the late 70s and early 80s. Ronald Reagan was a politician that people weren't really familiar with. Ronald Reagan loved this country, and he loved the Constitution. And of the politicians at a young age that had the most impact on me and the most influential would have been Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan despised communism. He despised communism, and if you'll remember, you may hear these quotes. It's been a long time ago, but I remember it, and I watched it on TV when he told Gorbachev to tear down this wall. He ended the Cold War, and I was very familiar with the Cold War, even though I was on the later end of it, but I do remember ducking underneath my desk with civil defense drills. So he was passionate about making sure that communism was a blight and eliminated from the face of the earth, and he tried everything he could to do that. I have a quote from President Reagan that I'd like to read. Ours was the first revolution in history of mankind that truly reversed the course of government. And with three little words, we the people tell the government what to do. It doesn't tell us. We the people are the driver. The government is the car. And we decide where it should go and by what route and how fast. Almost all the world's constitutions are documents in which governments tell people what their privileges are. Our Constitution is a document which we the people tell the government what it is allowed to do. We the people are free. And I think that is, there's no truer words ever spoken. The U.S. Constitution, just to give you a little bit of history, the Articles of Confederations were the first governing document of the United States, but they created a weak central government. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was convened in Philadelphia to address these weaknesses and create a new, stronger framework for national governance. The delegation debated and crafted the framework of the government we know today. And I believe something that people don't understand, and you know, things today aren't that much different from things in the past, and a lot of people have the impression that they all just met one day and shook hands and signed the Constitution. It was nothing like that. They had debate. They had arguments. It was a fight to get them to agree to the Constitution that we have. They weren't all dancing along on the same sheet of music. Many wanted a stronger state governments and a very weak federal government. Many wanted to divide the 13 colonies into regions where you would have like the New England region, the southern region. But the founding fathers in their wisdom decided that we needed a stronger central government. And the key figures at that time, George Washington, which I have heard is the father of the founding fathers. And if you ever get an opportunity to study and read or watch series, Legends and Lies, I watched not too long ago, and many of those stories or those programs are concerning George Washington and all that he did in the founding of this great country. James Madison, often called the father of the Constitution, and Alexander Hamilton, co-founder of the Federalist Papers. The ratification process, the Federalists who supported the Constitution and the anti-Federalists who opposed it engaged in a national debate. Under the procedure outlined in the Constitution, it would take effect once it had been ratified by 9 of the 13 state legislatures. Delaware was the first state to ratify the Constitution on December 7th, 1787. On May 23rd, 1788, South Carolina became the 8th state to ratify the Constitution. New Hampshire was the 9th state to ratify on June 22nd, 1788, and the Constitution went into effect on March 9th, 1789. On May 29th, 1790, all original 13 states had ratified the Constitution. Rhode Island was the final state to ratify. The Constitution serves as an introduction outlining the goals of the document. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States. The first article established the legislative branch, which is Congress. Article 2 established the executive branch, would be the president, responsible for enforcing laws. Article 3 established the judicial branch, the Supreme Court. Article 4 outlines the relationship between the states and the federal government and the admission of new states. Article 5 details the process for amending the Constitution. Article 6 establishes the Constitution as the supreme law of the land, requiring officials to swear an oath to it. And Article 7 specifies the ratification process for the Constitution. Now, why is this important? If you read especially those first 3 articles, what are our founding fathers doing there? They're delegating power. They're separation of powers. And that's what makes our country great. You have the executive branch, you have the legislative branch, and you have the judicial branch. And there's a checks and balances on each of those branches. So a lot of people, especially in Columbia, and you may have heard this before too, saying, why aren't they doing anything in Columbia? What's going on in Washington? Why can't they get anything passed up there? Well, it's hard to get a piece of legislation passed, and that's on purpose. It's a reason that it's hard, because the Founding Fathers wanted you to debate this legislation. They wanted the process to be slowed down, where you could not amend the Constitution or pass a law on a whim. And one reason for that is why our federal government is set up the way it is. The people body, or the House, has 2-year terms. So there's a lot of turnover. I know there's a lot of people that have been there for a long time, but the Founding Fathers wanted to give you the opportunity to constantly be sending new people to Washington. And they thought, being a 2-year term, they would be more accountable, because in a short time they would be up for re-election and they could be held accountable. But yet in the Senate, they decided that those terms should be 6 years. So why would those be 6 years? Well, because they wanted them to be more deliberate. And when the House sent a bill over, they wanted them to take that bill up, and they wanted them to debate it and make sure that it was constitutional and that it was a good bill for the Senate to pass. But then also, they didn't want the Senate to be worried that, they had time that they could take and debate the merits of the bill and not be worried about a re-election coming up like the next year or even the next 2 years. It gives them more independent. And I'll use this example also. Sometimes be glad bills don't pass. Sometimes be glad that certain legislation has stalled. I jokingly tell people sometimes, if the legislature is not in session, they're not in your pocket. They're not down there raising your taxes. They're not down there passing some legislation that just would not be a good piece of legislation at all. So separation in powers is definitely what the Founding Fathers wanted. And then also the president, of course, the president can veto, one person can veto this legislation, and then it requires 2/3 to override that veto. But what we should cherish as a nation and what separates us from the entire world and any government that has ever been formed is our Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights, were added to the Constitution in 1791 to protect individual liberties. These amendments limit government powers and guarantee fundamental rights. Significant amendments to the U.S. history. First Amendment protects freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. That is so important that we have freedom of speech. And you probably, in your classes or on the internet, hear a lot of debate about speech. And one thing that the Founding Fathers did not have at that time was the internet. And just because you can speak doesn't mean it's right, but you have the right to say it. And just because you say it doesn't mean you're not going to experience consequences from saying it, but you still have the right to say it. But that separates us from the world. And then also to mention the press. And the press was mentioned in the First Amendment because they are supposed to be the watchdog. They are supposed to oversee the legislature. They're the ones that are supposed to hold the government accountable and inform the public of what's going on. And when I was here, just to give you another story of how things have changed, say I had a report or I needed to study for a political science class, I had to go to the library, and you were lucky if the Post and Courier was less than 2 days old. You might get the current state paper, but most any paper out of state was probably a week old. And it is just incredible, and I couldn't imagine now in 2024 that all you have to do is pick up your phone and all the access that you have and the information that you can get now here in the 20th century, 21st century. Second Amendment protects the right to bear arms. A lot of people feel like, this so folks could go out and provide for their families, maybe that we could form a militia if we needed to, so the citizenry should be able to bear their arms. But I don't share in that opinion. You have the right to bear arms to protect yourself from government. That's why you have the right to bear arms. And if you go back and study history, what upset the colonists so much is because the British Army could come and they could quarter in your residence. They could come and, decide that it was time to eat and take your livestock. And this outraged the colonists, and that's one of the reasons that they wanted the right to bear arms so that they could protect themselves, not from intruders, but also protect themselves from the government seizing their assets. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable search and seizures. And going back to my days in law enforcement, if you hear probable cause, that is what the Fourth Amendment is talking about. You have to have a reason. You have to go to a magistrate. You have to tell them why you feel like you need to go and be able to search that property, or why that person to be charged with a certain offense. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States, marking a significant step in civil rights. And the only thing I will say about the 13th Amendment is I'm saddened that it took 70 years for it to pass. And this was one of the hotly debated issues when the first ratification of the Constitution, they got it wrong. But because of our great Constitution, eventually they got it right. And I do use this example, and I heard this. We done in 70 years what it took South Africa 600 years to do. So our Constitution does work. Sometimes it doesn't work fast enough. The 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote, a milestone in the fight for gender equity. Now, a lot of people feel like the Constitution is just a piece of paper. It's sitting up in Washington in archives. It's got some nice lights on it. You can come walk by it, but they don't feel like it's a live document. But let me tell you, it is a working document. It is working today. It's been working over 250 years. And I never dreamed when I was a student here at Newberry College that someday I would have a duty that was described in Article 2, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution, and that is the Electoral College. And a lot of people aren't familiar with the Electoral College, but at that time, they felt like each state should have electors, and when you vote for president, you're not actually voting for the president, you are voting for those electors. And South Carolina has 9 of those electors. Clause 2 provides that each state shall have electors equal to the number of senators and representatives. So we have 9. Thank you. Extra credit. Clause 3 provides that each elector shall vote by ballot for president and vice president. Each state shall then transmit a certification of persons receiving votes and the number of votes received to the seat of government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate, who is the sitting Vice President. The President of the Senate shall then open the certificates and count the votes, and the person receiving the greatest number of votes shall be President. Clause 4 provides that Congress determines the day upon which the Electoral College meets, and that the days shall be the same in each state. A lot of people think the Secretary of State in South Carolina oversees elections. Most Secretary of States in the United States do oversee elections, but we don't. In 1969, the legislature decided to separate elections from the Secretary of State's office. So now we have an election commission, and that is where you would go to check to see if you're registered to vote, any information about elections. If you get a chance, they have a wonderful website. They have one of the best websites in the country called SC Votes. But it is a wealth of information, and please register to vote. In South Carolina, the Secretary of State presides over the meeting of the Electoral College. At least 60 days prior to the general election, political parties file notifications of their candidates for presidential and vice presidential electors and alternates with the Secretary of State. Each candidate for president and vice president elector must declare the candidates whom they would vote for and file the declaration with the Secretary of State. Following receipt of the declaration of the electors, each political party, the Secretary of State, sees notifications of the nominated electors to the State Elections Commission. And a matter of fact, I done that last week and sent the names of the electors for the 7 parties to the Elections Commission. The electors selected by each certified political party are actually the candidates voted for on election day. Under Section 7, 1970, each party's candidate appears on the ballot rather than the names of the party's individual electors. However, a vote for a party's candidate is actually a vote for the party's elector. Electors' forms received for the 2024 presidential election. And I was just going to briefly give you the parties that are recognized here in the state of South Carolina and their candidates. The South Carolina Constitutional Party is Randall Terry, for president, and Stephen Broden for vice president. The Democratic Party is Kamala Harris for president, Tim Walz for vice president. The Green Party is Jill Stein for president, Randolph Butch Ware for vice president. The Libertarian Party, Chase Oliver for president, and Mike Tiermate, I hope that's correct, for vice president. And the Republican Party, Donald J. Trump for president, J.D. Vance for vice president, and the South Carolina Workers Party, Claudia D. LaCruz for president, and Karina Garcia for vice president. And the United Citizens Party is Cornel West for president, and Melina Abdullah for vice president. The Alliance Party and the Forward Party notified the Secretary of State's office that they are not having candidates on the ballot this election cycle. So all parties have to submit 60 days prior to the election their 9 electors. Then on election day, when the votes are tabulated, I will receive a certification from the Elections Commission. Once I receive that certification, then the winner of the state of South Carolina will receive notice that they need to report to the Secretary of State's office in December, and they changed the date. Now they meet on the first Tuesday after the second Wednesday in November. Each elector is selected by each certified political party or actual candidates. This year's presidential election will be held on Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. And once they meet, I turn the meeting over to their chair. They will elect a chair, and they will have a treasurer. They will actually pass ballots out to each other, and they will be asked to vote for vice president, and then they will be asked to vote for president. They'll tabulate those 9 ballots. They'll give them to the treasurer, and the treasurer will report to the president who received all 9 electoral votes. And once we determine the winner of president, vice president, then the electors will be asked to sign a certificate of vote. And can you show them the certificate of vote for me? And that was the 2020 certificate of vote. And in 2020, Donald J. Trump and Mike Pence won the most votes. So their 9 electors were summoned to the Secretary of State's office, and on December they cast their vote for president. That's the certificate that I send to Washington. Okay. I'll skip ahead a little bit here. The Electoral College. Following the electoral meeting, the Secretary of State delivers the certificates of vote and certifies certificates of ascertainment to the following entities. 1 set goes to the President of the Senate of the United States. 2 sets goes to the Executive Director of the State Elections Commission. 2 sets to the Archivist of the United States. 1 set to the Federal Judge of the district in which the electors have been assembled. The Secretary of State also keeps 2 certificates of vote and 2 certificates of ascertainment on file. For the upcoming presidential election, Congress will meet to tabulate the Electoral College votes on January 6th. Does that date sound familiar to anyone in here? January 6th is the day that they will tabulate, and I pray that it's not the same as our last January 6th. So again, I just never dreamed someday that I would have such a role in the Constitution and provide a duty to which we would elect the President of the United States. And before I was elected, the electors would be summoned to the office. They would meet in the conference room, and they would just pass the certificate of vote around. They would all sign it, and then they would leave. And I changed that. I said, this is special. This is something that these electors should remember. we are going to have a ceremony. And I asked ETV to tape that ceremony. I've asked classes if they wanted to come and witness the signing of the vote of the Electoral College. And I can tell you now, where people did not talk much about being an elector or the Electoral College, now parties, especially parties who feel like they're going to win the state, folks actually fight and have to run to be elected as an elector. And now they feel like that is such a special privilege or a special election to be honored to be elected to cast your vote for president. So I very much look forward to certifying the Electoral College in December. I wanted to mention our state. Well, let me see. Let me get ahead of myself. Okay, federal versus state constitutions. Federalism. The U.S. Constitution establishes a federal system of government, dividing powers between national government and the states. Example of federal power: taxation, defense, interstate commerce. Interstate commerce is very important. I mean, you know, you can get in your car right now and you can drive all the way to California, and unless you violate a traffic law, no one will stop you and no one will question you. And that's part of freedom also. And that is something that's very rare. Go overseas and you have checkpoints, you have different countries, you have to show visa. And it's really a privilege that a lot of people do not really appreciate, that you have the freedom to go anywhere that you want to here, as long as you have the means to do it and not be stopped or questioned to do that. Each state has its own constitution that governs state laws and operations. State constitutions offer more specific protections and address issues unique to the state, provide a legal framework for state governance, including the structure of state government, rights of citizens, and the powers of government. In relationship to the U.S. Constitution, state constitutions must align with the U.S. Constitution, but can provide additional protections or impose more restrictions. And as far as our state constitution, well, I'll give you a little background first. Quickly, the South Carolina Constitution was adopted in 1776 during the American Revolution. The state constitution has been revised several times, with the current version adopted in 1895, and I serve as Secretary of State under the 1895 Constitution. Current Constitution 1895 reflects the political and social context of the post-Reconstruction era. The document has been amended numerous times to reflect changing societal needs. The structure of the South Carolina Constitution, the preamble sets forth the state's guiding principles similar to the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, the Declaration of Rights, similar to the Bill of Rights. Article 3 establishes the General Assembly, the legislative branch of South Carolina. And as far as the legislative branch, in the 1895 Constitution, they wanted to dilute power even more than the federal government. And when this was adopted, there was 9 constitutional offices. You voted for governor, you voted for lieutenant governor, you voted for secretary of state, you voted for comptroller general, you voted for treasurer, you voted for the attorney general. And the Constitution has been revised. Now we have 7 constitutional officers. The governor, lieutenant governor now run on the same ticket. Then you have your secretary of state. Then you have the attorney general, the treasurer, and the comptroller, and the superintendent of education. And you had a chance to make the superintendent appointed, if you so wish to do so, several election cycles ago with a constitutional amendment. And you decided that you wanted to continue to elect your superintendent of education. And a lot of people make the argument, because of the executive branch being so diluted, is the reason that we have such a powerful legislative branch. And we do have a very powerful legislative branch here in South Carolina. But this has been my opinion as a constitutional elected official. I have the attitude that I would rather do everything I can to serve 5.5 million people here in the state of South Carolina, which is the South Carolina's population, than one person, the governor. How many cabinet officials are here speaking to you tonight? You have an elected official here accountable to you that is here speaking about the Constitution and taking your phone calls. And if you are not satisfied with the performance of the Secretary of State's office, every 4 years, I tell everyone, you're the boss and you have the ultimate evaluation if you want me to continue to serve as your Secretary of State. And personally, I like it that way. And I also have the attitude, never give up your right to vote on anything. You'll never get it back. And I think it has happened on a few occasions, but once you give up your right to vote, very, very seldom will you ever have the right to vote on that again. Details in the process of amending the Constitution require approval by the General Assembly and ratified by the voters. Creation of the Secretary of State's office, and is everyone in the protocol here? A lot of folks may not know this, but when we had the inauguration, they lined the constitutional officers up to go down the steps before they're sworn in, and you have usually you start off with the Department of Agriculture, and then I believe it's the Superintendent of Education. Well, I'm before the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor. Now, why do you think that is? The Secretary of State was the third constitutional officer listed in the Constitution. So if you go by protocol, when you're introduced, you should go by the amendment that created the position, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State. Under Section 22 of the 1776 Constitution, the Secretary of the Colony was elected by the General Assembly and Legislative Council. The Secretary swore to defend the state constitution until an accommodation with Great Britain was reached. March 19, 1778, under Section 29 of the 1778 Constitution, the Secretary of State was elected for a 2-year term by the Senate and the House of Representatives. And there's 2 states that the legislature still elects their Secretary of State, and that is Maine and it is Tennessee. The Secretary of State sworn to defend the state and maintain copies of the laws. 1790 Constitution, the Secretary of State elected for a 4-year term with no consecutive terms allowed, swore to defend both the state and the U.S. Constitution. Evolution of the office in April 8th, 1861, a sad day. Duties and elections, election methods similar to prior constitutions, swore allegiance to the Confederacy. September 27th, 1865, swore allegiance to the United States after the Civil War. March 17th, 1868, Secretary of State elected by voters allowed consecutive terms. New duties included countersigning grants and certifying elections. And then September 1895, current office established, Secretary elected to 4 years terms. Duties include countersigning commissions and managing the Great Seal of South Carolina. The role of the Secretary of State is outlined. Duties of constitutional officer in South Carolina include Secretary of State. The Secretary of State's responsibilities are further defined by state law. The Secretary of State's office implements and enforces various aspects of South Carolina Constitution, particularly in the business regulation and public records. Primary functions is business filings. Who in here wants to be an entrepreneur? Who's going to go out there and make a lot of money? Who wants to incorporate? You may want to incorporate and form a corporation for your business. You can be a sole proprietor, but most people want to incorporate because that offers more protections for them because they're their own entity where there's a certain amount of exposure where if you're domestic, if you are not incorporated, you may be more liability. business is good in South Carolina. Last year we set a record. We had 20% more corporate filings than we did the year before, 187,000 corporate filings. And UCCs, which you may not be familiar with, but a very important part of the Secretary of State's office, if you add total business filings, it is close to 300 filings here in South Carolina. All of those are records. The Secretary of State's office, as said, maintains and provides access to essential public records. And what that means also is everything in the Secretary of State's office is public record. So if you want to know who a registered agent of a corporation is, you can go to the website and you can see who that registered agent is. If you wanted to contact someone from that corporation, if you wanted to look at the articles of incorporation, you can do a document request and view that document of the incorporation. UCCs, if you want to see if someone has outstanding liens that owes someone money and who they owe that money to, or which bank holds that UCC against the debtor, all that is public record in the Secretary of State's office, and that is vital to the business interests here in South Carolina, because if you go and buy a company, you want to know what's outstanding with that company. You want to know what they may owe other lending institutions, and all that is part of the closing. Also with UCCs, it's very important because if a corporation was to file for bankruptcy, depending on the UCCs filed against the corporation, a lot of times that's how the judge forms the pecking order and how people are going to be paid back during the bankruptcy hearing. But I'm also the keeper of the Great Seal. And one other thing that, and one of the first projects that I took up being elected, I oversee boards and commissions. And I wanted to make boards and commissions here in South Carolina as transparent as I possibly could. And you can go to the Secretary of State's office, you can type in the name of a board, and it will come up and it will tell you who's currently serving. It'll tell you when their term expires. It'll tell you how that board was created. It'll tell you who appointed that individual to the board. It'll tell you how many vacancies there are, and it'll tell you if it's upon advice and consent of the Senate. Now, why is that important? Because everyone complains about their road, but who knows who their highway commissioner is? People complain about education or the Board of Education, but they don't know who serves on the Board of Education. And a lot of these are very powerful boards. Many of them don't pay. I mean, the majority, more than the majority, don't pay, but still, they oversee these agencies, they oversee their budgets, they oversee their funding, they oversee their hiring, and they're very powerful, and you need to know who is serving. You may want to know who's serving on the South Carolina Elections Commission, that 5-member board, if you have issues with elections coming up this November. So I wanted to get that information out there, and I wanted to make it public. I want to move along here, and I'm going to focus on the duty that most people are the most familiar with, and that is the enforcement of the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. Who here has been asked for a charitable contribution? Anybody? Everybody? You know, South Carolina ranks in the top half of the nation when it comes to charitable giving. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Doesn't that speak a lot about your neighbors, a lot about your community, that they are willing to give, that they want to help others? And I think it's a wonderful thing that we rank so high in charitable giving. But people also ask me, Mark, why do we get so many calls? Why do we get so many solicitations? I said, well, didn't I just tell you because we rank so high in charitable giving? People are calling because they know they have a chance that you would give. So we don't want anyone to take advantage of our generosity, do we? So we have to regulate the nonprofit community, and I work with the nonprofit community. I think the nonprofit community is wonderful. They provide a tremendous amount of services here to the state. They can provide service, I feel like, better than state and federal government because they know where the needs are. They have boots on the ground. They don't have the bureaucracy that they have to go through with other state agencies. But then there still has to be transparency. So if you form a nonprofit here in the state of South Carolina, you have to pay $25. You'll receive your articles of incorporation. If you want to ask for charitable contributions, if you want to ask for contributions for your nonprofit, then you have to register in the Secretary of State's office. It's $50. Every year you have to register to be able to solicit. If your calendar year is January to December, by May 15th of the next year, you have to file either the state's annual report or your 990. If you do not register in the Secretary of State's office and we find out that you're asking for contributions, it's a $2,000 fine. If you do not send in your report May 15th, you're charged $10 a day until it maxes out to $2,000. When I first was elected, I used to have charities meetings, and we talked about doing everything we could to have these organizations get into compliance. But I think at that time, maybe we had 5,000 or 6,000 charities registered in the office. And a good year was collecting probably $140,000 in fines. Now in 2024, we have over 17,000 charities registered, and we collected over $1 million in fines last year, nonprofits that were out of compliance with the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. I would much rather see that go to help those in need instead of going to the general fund here in South Carolina. But that is the only way that we can hold these organizations accountable. It's very important that I get the annual report because that's where I derive the information that I want to use to educate the donor. And you can go to the Secretary of State's website, sos.sc.gov. You can do a charity search or search charities. You can type in the name of the organization, and it will tell you if they are registered here in the state of South Carolina. It'll give you a number. It'll tell you how much money they raised. It'll tell you their expenses, how much money they spent. They'll tell you what their assets are. And then what you should always pay attention to, it'll tell you how much money they spent on fundraising. And fundraisers also have to file contracts in the Secretary of State's office. So I know how much money the fundraiser is getting with each solicitation. Would anybody like to guess how much money the fundraiser gets of the dollar it raises? Anybody throw out a number? Yeah? No, more than that. How about 85%? 85% of your dollar goes to the fundraiser before it goes to the charitable purpose. It's not against the law. So that's my duty to educate and to get out, and I travel all over the state to tell people that they need to research and look at these organizations that are giving very little to their charitable purpose. So if you see 0.08, what does that tell you as a charitable donor? Less than 10% of your dollars going to the charitable purpose. What if you see 0.80? 80% is going to the charitable purpose. The Better Business Bureau says that if you are looking to give to a charity, you should look around the 65% range. So 65% should go toward the charitable purpose. Last year we received like 800 complaints from charitable organizations, and I had a lot of people who would contact me and say, Mark, I want to tell you about this organization. They pressured me and they didn't feel as though they were legitimate. I wanted to check them out before I gave to them, but I can't remember their name. And it's hard to pull up the website and go search charities, and by the time you can do that, maybe you've forgotten the name of the company that was soliciting you. So we created an app. Everyone has a cell phone, don't they? you can download a free app from the Secretary of State's office. It's called Give Smart SC. You can do it on Apple and you can do it on Google. We've offered this now for about a year, and we have over 1,200 people who have downloaded the app. And what I love about the app is you can file a confidential complaint on the app. So if you feel uncomfortable with that solicitation, you feel like they are in violation of the Solicitation Charitable Funds Act, you can file a complaint, name the charity, and we will take a look at that organization. And because of the app and because of the other complaints that we received, like I said earlier, this year we collected over $1 million in fines from charitable organizations. And I have a copy of the Give Smart flyer here if anybody would like to pick one of those up. Now, that's rather depressing, isn't it? And that's kind of sad. It's time to pick it up a little bit, isn't it? I have one program that was established in the Secretary of State's office, I believe in 1998. I think last year was the 25th year. It started off as the Scrooge and Angels list. I changed that because there's a lot of bad organizations out there, but I want to recognize the good organizations. And I meant to say earlier, the nonprofit community, when it comes to the state's economic impact, is fourth. A lot of people don't know that. You have tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, and the nonprofit. And it's, I think, close to $4 billion economic impact. So we want to recognize the good organizations here in South Carolina. Every year, the Secretary of State's office recognizes 10 angel charities in order to raise awareness about wise charitable giving. Angels include a variety of organizations that have a significant impact on South Carolina and must meet this criteria. The charity must devote 80% or more of its expenses to programs. The charity must have been in existence for 3 or more years. The charity must make good use of volunteer services and not rely heavily on grants, because a lot of these organizations are struggling to be able to meet their budgets and to be able to receive contributions. And I feel like a lot of nonprofits which do good work may receive hundreds of thousands of dollars from the state or from their county to offset their expenses. And when they receive so much in federal grants, I feel like sometimes they're a quasi-state agency. So we really try to recognize those organizations who need volunteers. And also what I am glad that we are able to do now is accept nominations. And we have wonderful nominees from across the state. And last year we recognized 4 charitable organizations that were nominated from citizens here in South Carolina. How are we on our time? Okay. Well, I'd just like to end with this. I hope that you all are having a wonderful experience here at Newberry College. I definitely enjoyed my time here, and it's an absolute honor for me to be invited to be able to speak on the Constitution. And I don't tell everyone I'm a Newberry graduate. I'm a proud Newberry graduate. And just remember, like in 1856, somebody had the vision to start this college. And thank goodness after that, people were good enough to continue to support this college. And now I try to do what I can to support this college, but we will need you in the future to contribute and support the college. And if you got a scholarship, if you had a wonderful experience there, please help Newberry College so someone else can share that same experience that you had here one day. And I want to wrap up one more quote concerning the Constitution. And it says, all presidents but Jefferson have argued that their first job was to keep us safe. All presidents but Jefferson were wrong. If you read the Constitution, you will see that the president's first job, as Jefferson understood well, is to keep us free. That's the first job of the Constitution, is to keep us free. Andrew Napolitano, former New Jersey Superior Court. God bless each and every one of you. God bless Newberry. Thank you for having me.
Mark, I want to thank you.